Richard, it's now 8 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and welcome folks in. You are watching right now First Coast News' online coverage of the trial of 3 men charged with murder in the shooting death of Ahmaud Arbery. Ahmaud Arbery, at just 25 years old, was shot and killed in the Satilla Shores neighborhood there in Brunswick within Glynn County back in February of 2020. Arrests weren't made until May of that year, and now fast forward to October of 2021. The Arbery family that I've spoke with, they say that finally they are hopeful to get justice. Now, right now, we are in the jury selection process of all of this. The trial really just started last week, Monday. So it's now week 2, day 9 of this jury selection process. The pace moving rather slowly, but we'll get into that in just a bit with why that needs to happen. So let's just get you caught up in the very latest right now. At this point, the pool stands at 47. 47 potential jurors have been chosen thus far. The judge is aiming to get to a number of 64. Now, of that 64, that large pool of people, they're going to go through another round of questioning, and then ultimately the goal is to whittle that down to 12 impartial jurors and 4 alternates. Will that happen? We're waiting to see, because we do know that today, Friday, was supposed to be the day that they had all of the potential jurors seated. That will not be the case, obviously. It'll likely happen next week. But we're going to pull in Richard Kurtz, who you see right there, Attorney Richard Kurtz. We appreciate you waking up with us this morning to give us some insight in all of this. Richard, you've been with us through many trials before here as a First Coast News analyst, so you have some great insight. And we were just talking off camera just now about this case and the pace of it and why we're seeing the jury selection process go so slowly. That's something that you are on board with. You say it's something that's necessary in this case.
Absolutely. I think they're taking their time to do it right is crucial. The most important part of any criminal trial, especially when you're dealing with a homicide, is the jury selection process.
Recording in progress.
What you have to do is you've got to talk to every juror. You can't just simply go, I can't remember what, Tim Deegan said. I can't remember what somebody else said. You have to be able to talk to every single person and take your time. So while it may be frustrating to a judge or it may be frustrating to the family, it's critical if you don't want the case to get reversed on appeal. If you want the case to be final and you want to do it correctly, you just have to do this. It just takes time to pick the right jurors. And we're talking about such a small community. It's just going to take some time because, people are going to have their biases. People already know the story. So it's going to take some time. So I am not disappointed that it's taken this long.
And not surprised by that either. So you mentioned the community, small town, 85,000 or so people there within Glynn. Of that number, we know 1,000 potential jurors were initially pulled in. They were given summons. You hear that number 1,000 and you're thinking, oh my gosh, that's a large number of people. But again, it was necessary in this because what we're seeing in the questioning, I'm sure you're watching this as well and seeing this, a lot of the people being questioned are saying that they know the key players within this case. We're talking about the defendants as well as the Arbery's, the victim's family. So it's kind of not surprising that they needed such a large jury pool. But again, the pace of things is leaving a mark on some folks. Even the Arbery family, we spoke with the aunts outside. They are getting a bit frustrated saying, what is taking so long?
Well, and they should be patient because nobody ever wants to do this again. Okay. Mm-hmm. If this is going to go correctly and you're going to get finality in this thing, it has to take its time and you have to do it correctly. And you mentioned the victim's family, you mentioned the defendants and their connections. But also, what people don't think about is that law enforcement officers that are involved in this, they have family members, they have friends, and they have opinions about things too. So it's the entire community. It's not just the Arbery family or the defendant's family. There's a lot of moving parts in this kind of thing. So they should take their time, and I'm glad they're taking their time. And actually, I think it should go another week, if you ask me.
Wow.
Or at least to Tuesday or Wednesday to do it properly so that you don't have to put the victim's family through this again one day.
Now, Richard, you practice law here in Jacksonville. You're not affiliated with this case in any way. You're just giving us analysis as an FCN, a legal expert here, but I do know that you've been down this road before, right? It is difficult to find an impartial jury under normal circumstances. So under a case like this where it's gaining all this national attention, it's a small town, will it actually be possible to find an impartial jury?
My opinion is no. I think this case should have been moved. When I say that, I mean that very firmly, that this case should have been moved, whether it's even up to Savannah, whether it's to Atlanta. This is a case that should have been moved out of that jurisdiction. Judges are hesitant to change venue because of the cost and things of that nature. And you have to put the victim's family through the travel cost. You have to put the court through the travel cost. But at the end of the day, if you're going to give these three gentlemen or men a fair trial, I'm not so confident that you're going to get the jury that could truly be fair and impartial.
You mentioned something a lot of folks were asking earlier on that kind of got squashed over this week. I haven't heard it as much, but I remember I was down there in Brunswick last week on Monday, Tuesday during the beginning of this, and a lot of people were asking, what are the odds of there actually being a change of venue in this case? At this point, do you see that happening?
No, it's too late. No, unless, well, I say it's too late. I do believe it's too late. I firmly believe that. However, if there's a mistrial or if they're unable to seat a juror or jury, then yes, then it could be moved, but it's kind of too late at this point.
And even the process itself, you were explaining to me what it actually takes. This is a lot of money, a lot of time,
Right.
and hours that go into this. What do you do? What is the process like to actually change venue?
Well, if you change venue in Jacksonville, the Fourth Judicial Circuit, they almost never change anything, and I've mentioned that to you. South of us, they change venue very often. It's not unusual to change venue to get a fair trial and a fair jury. But then you have to move the judge, all of the lawyers, prosecutors. We have 3 defendants. We have probably 6 defense lawyers. We have to move the clerk's office. We have to worry about the court reporter. We're going to have to worry about security. We're going to put all of these people in hotel rooms. We're going to have to move them, basically move the entire courthouse to Atlanta or somewhere else. And the cost of that is obviously going to be astronomical. But if we're going to do a fair trial, then sometimes you just have to do it. And but judges are extremely reluctant to do it. And obviously in this community, it should have been done, in my opinion. It should have been done. But judges just don't want to do it because of the cost.
Yeah. Richard, let's say that you were one of the defense attorneys in this case. How concerned would you be at this point with the process and how things are going in terms of, 1, seating an impartial jury, and 2, them actually having a fair trial, the defendants in this case?
The concern, as you know, I've done several, high-profile cases, and I've tried several, homicide cases, death penalty cases. The concern you always have is what we call a stealth juror, somebody who actually wants to be on a jury panel. I mean, most people, when they get a jury summons, they go, how do I get out of jury duty? Who can I call? Who can, whatever, how can I get out of it? But in cases like this, in cases, that are high profile, sometimes jurors want to be on the jury and you don't know it. And so you have to have concerns about whether they're being truthful with you when they're answering their questions, or if they're just simply trying to get on. There's obviously a group that wants to get off, but there is a group that wants to get on. So that's something, as a defense lawyer, when you're doing the questions, you have to talk to each individual juror and get a feel for each individual juror, because nobody wants to say they can't be fair and impartial. Everybody wants to say, I can be fair and impartial. Yes, I can follow the law. Yes, I will follow the judge's instructions. But sometimes they're not always being honest with you. And so you have to take your time to get to know each juror. So that's why I say that taking this amount of time for the jury is a good thing. It's a good thing that you got to know the jury. The judge needs to know the jury. The prosecutor needs to know the jury. It's about, you have your day in court, and this day turns into a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. But if you want finality and you want a true verdict, you have to take your time.
So grateful to have you on here this morning, because your insight is so important in my opinion, because there are some things that we're seeing happening inside the court and you're thinking to yourself, why is this okay? Just yesterday, we heard an 18-year-old girl say she did not want to be on the jury. She felt as if she was too young to be able to determine someone else's future, someone else's life. We're talking about 3 defendants here. She was chosen to go to the next round.
And that's, when you do enough of these cases, you find those kind of things happen, and you wonder to yourself, why is the judge allowing that, or why is the prosecutor allowing that? And what happens is, when you get to the actual, once they whittle it down, there's what we call peremptory challenges, and then there are cause challenges. So what is being said is that she thinks she could be, apparently somebody thinks she could be fair and impartial and be on the panel, but somebody can clearly strike her later if they don't feel, whether it's the prosecutor or the defense, somebody can strike her from the panel. Just the fact that she made it to the next level doesn't mean she's going to be on the 12-person or 4-person alternate panel.
When I heard her speak, I thought about Michael Dunn's trial. I don't know if you remember that, the first trial back in February of 2014, I believe it was. There was a young lady on the jury who was just 21 years old. And when she was interviewed afterwards, she sounded confused, kind of like she felt as if she was too young to be on there herself. I'm sure a lot of people on the outside looking in felt the same way. So you kind of question, at that age, are you even capable of judging in a case like this? You are pretty much judging someone else's life and determining their future.
Well, and you said a couple words that come up all the time when we're in jury selection in the trials, is you're really not judging the person. Mm-hmm. What you have to do is make your decision based on the evidence. Mm-hmm. You're not judging a human being. Mm-hmm. You're not trying to decide if he's a good person, bad person. You're supposed to say, state has a burden of proof.
Supposed to, but human nature.
Oh, no. Listen, I could talk to you all day about jury selection and whether I think people are telling the truth or not telling the truth, or whether there's stealth jurors that want to be on the panel, or there are people that just want to be off the panel. But I understand human nature better than anybody else. Having picked, I say better than anybody else, having tried so many cases, no, it is human nature, and people do feel that way. And that's why, like in the death penalty cases that I try, people get hung up on the idea that they may be imposing a death sentence on somebody. Now, fortunately, in this case, it's not a death case, but those kind of issues do come up, and people feel like they're, and that what you just said it's typical where people say, I just can't judge another human being, and I can't do that. Well, you're not judging the human being. What you're supposed to be doing is listening to the evidence, evaluating the evidence, and following the rules, and then you make your decision whether it's guilty or not guilty, whether the state proved the case beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's what you're supposed to do. And then you deliberate, you follow the judge's instructions. You're not judging the person, you're just basically judging the state's case. Did the state prove it? Did the law enforcement officers provide the correct evidence? Did the witnesses provide the correct evidence? And you base the credibility of the witnesses, and then you make your decision after that.
Let's talk about outside possible distractions. We did hear the day before yesterday, the defense arguing that the demonstrators outside were somehow swaying potential jurors. In a case like this, though, you expect to have demonstrators, which we're seeing pretty much every day throughout the duration of this trial so far. As every day there's demonstrators outside protesting. You see the sign saying justice for Ahmaud. There's even a little child that was brought up. He's about 3 years old. He rides on a little motorcycle with the justice for Ahmaud on his back. And the defense was saying that's a distraction, it's a problem. Even had a problem with a button that Ahmaud Arbery's father wore inside the courtroom. Your thoughts on that? Because the judge did ultimately say, no, that's not going to affect things. What are your thoughts on that?
this is why we come back to the topic we talked about earlier, that the case should not be tried there. It should not be tried there. I mean, the judge, and I don't want to be critical of a judge or the judge's ruling, but my opinion, based on everything that I know about this, it should not be tried there. Is it possibly a distraction? Yes. Then we come back to the jurors that we've been talking about. Are we going to be able to find a fair and impartial panel? I've tried to move venue in Jacksonville on homicides and death cases maybe 20 times, okay? Never been granted on my behalf. But we have, well over 1 million people. We have 1.5 or 1.8, whatever our population has now gotten up to. Mm-hmm. That's different because we have people coming in that just got off a naval ship that doesn't know anything about the case. We have people that just moved down from New York that don't know anything about the case. We have people from New Jersey or people that come in and, we have a huge population here in Jacksonville. So I can pick a fair panel in some cases. But do I try to move it? Oh, of course I try to move it. But that's such a small population, whether it's the jurors that know each other, whether it's the police officers, whether it's the victims, it just really shouldn't be tried there, is my humble opinion. Mm-hmm. But is it a distraction? Yes. Yes, I think it could be a distraction. Is it going to cause me concern at the end of the day of whether this case ultimately gets reversed for some reason? Yeah, that's a real possibility.
Wow. No one wants to go through this all over again. We're hoping things actually stay on course and work out. I want to talk about the fact that you said you tried 20 times to have a change of venue. It didn't work out. It happened once. You were telling me earlier back in 1998 with Maddie Clifton. Give us the circumstances why it actually was feasible that time.
Well, it's a very good question. And the irony is the judge did it on his own. It wasn't even the defense lawyer who made the motion to change venue. Judge Chuck Arnold made the decision that just based on all of the publicity, based on everything that was there, the judge did it on his own motion. He didn't even wait for the defense lawyer or the prosecutor to make a change of venue. Chuck Arnold, the judge at the time, who's retired now, he's the one who actually said, there's no way in the world we're going to get a fair trial here. Mm-hmm. And he moved it. The only time that in my 30 years of practicing law here that I've seen that happen.
Yeah, 30 years is a long time. You could definitely give us a lot of insight in this. Is there anything that you're seeing, because you're watching this closely like many of us, anything that you're seeing happening inside of the courtroom that is kind of standing out to you?
Well, Georgia's different than Florida. The way they break it down and the way they handle it is much different. In Jacksonville, for instance, we bring in 98 jurors. I mean, there's 7 rows of 7, so it's 49 on each side, and we go through that. Georgia does it differently, and so they break down and they go through the process they go through, and obviously there's a high profile case with a bunch of publicity, so they do it much different. So does that stand out to me? Yes, it's just a different style. Have I tried cases in Georgia? Yes. Are the juries in the jury selection process different? Yes. It's every state has their different way of doing things. And so is it unique to me? Practicing here in Jacksonville for 30 years? Yes. But do I understand their process? Yes, I understand their process. So I don't think that I've seen anything that's bizarre for Georgia. No, I mean, but it is definitely different than what you and I would see here in Jacksonville.
Yeah. There's a lot of things that are different this time around, but besides in this particular case, because now we have the pandemic playing a role in all of this. You mentioned the size of the courtroom and the number of jurors that can fit in there. 600 people were supposed to report on last week, Monday. They didn't get that number. I mean, obviously, everyone knew it wouldn't be that many. But what they had to do was move it to a community center nearby. They couldn't even bring them into the courthouse at that point, because there's a lot of different factors in this. But I do want to get back to that number of 1,000 jurors being summoned. Your thoughts on that?
That is unique.
Okay.
In all of the high-profile cases that I've tried, I do not. Well, I mean, 1,000 people, on a daily Monday morning in Jacksonville is probably extreme. It's probably extreme. Okay. I have had high profile cases where I've sat 98 people in a courtroom, and I've gone through and I made it to number 97. Okay. The, that I got that were not eligible to serve, but 98 was available. Okay. And so we were able to whittle it down. But then the judge told me that he had another 98 people in the city hall building waiting for their day to come up. So it is, but now there were other courtrooms going on. There were other cases going on. So if there were 1,000 people just for this case, and that was the only trial, yeah, that's extreme. That's extreme. I've never had that happen.
Well, folks, if you are just now joining us, you're watching First Coast News' online coverage of the trial of 3 men charged with murder in the shooting death of Ahmaud Arbery. Ahmaud Arbery was shot and killed back in February of 2020 in the Satilla Shores neighborhood of Glynn County. And at this point now, fast forward to 2021, October of 2021, finally, these men are on trial for murder, for Ahmaud Arbery's killing. Joining us this morning is Richard Kurtz, a local attorney here in Jacksonville, not affiliated with this case, but he's giving us some insight as a trial attorney here in Jacksonville. Richard, you have touched on so many high-profile cases. We turn to you often for insight. You are here to give us some insight into things because as novices, as outsiders looking in, we're kind of thinking to ourselves, how will it be possible to seat an impartial jury in this case? Glynn County is so small, and a lot of the people being questioned, a lot of the jurors that we saw have moved on through. Right now, the number stands at 47. 47 potential jurors have been chosen so far. Many of them raised their hands when asked if they knew certain key players within this case. How can we move forward fairly?
Well, if anybody in the courtroom did not raise their hand, I'd be surprised. Okay. I mean, or they're just maybe not being honest with themselves because that is such a small community. And everybody in the United States has heard of this case. Everybody from Georgia, Florida has heard of this case. Now, the question is ultimately what the judge is going to ask and what the prosecutors are going to ask is, can you set that aside? And have you made a decision already? Or can you still listen to the evidence? And that's the key is that can you still listen to the evidence and set aside anything else? Or have you already decided he's guilty or they're guilty or no, that he's, he was a criminal or he was breaking into a house? If somebody already has a predisposition, then they're not eligible. So that's going to be the magic words that are going to have to be spoken is, yes, I've heard of it. Everybody's heard of it. Just like O.J. Simpson, everybody had heard of it. There was so many high profile cases around the nation. But the question ultimately is, can you set that aside and make a decision based on the evidence that you hear and the law that the judge instructs you? So that's those are the jurors that are going to make it if we get that far.
Yeah. We want to talk about where we stand at this point right now. 47 potential jurors have been chosen. Right now, the judge is aiming to get to 64. Of that pool of 64 potential jurors, they are aiming to get an impartial jury seated of 12 jurors with 4 alternates. Will that happen? I'm sure the family is hopeful that it will, the Arbery family, because they have waited quite some time right now to see these men finally get to trial. Joining us this morning is Richard Kurtz, a local attorney here in Jacksonville, and I want to talk about the pace of this jury selection process. You said it's highly important, but people need to understand. It feels as if it's going rather slowly. We're in week 2 right now, day 9, but you mentioned it is critical.
It is absolutely critical that everybody takes their time. Recall, this case didn't happen 30 days ago or 90 days ago. This case has been going on for quite a while. And there was a long investigation and there was a great deal of things that went into it. And we have 3 different co-defendants. We have different, moving parts that are involved in this, which means not only is the judge going to ask questions, the prosecutor's going to ask questions, and then there's going to be 3 different defense lawyers that are going to stand up and ask questions. So this is just going to take some time, especially if you summons 1,000 people and you're whittling it down. I mean, common sense is going to say this is going to take a few minutes. Okay, this is not going to happen in one day.
Mm-hmm.
So, and jury selection is the most critical part of any trial. I mean, it truly is, because if you don't have a fair and impartial jury to start with, then where are you going with this case? So you have to have a jury that each side believes is going to be fair and impartial. If you don't, then you're wasting your time. You're preaching to the choir instead of or the pelicans. So I personally think this is the most important part, and everybody should be patient. And I think the family should be patient because they don't want to do this again. And if you don't sit the right jury, then you're going to have a problem later on an appeal, because everybody knows the story of appeals and why cases are drag on. So I personally believe this portion of the trial is probably the most important portion of this trial that's going to take place. I suspect the trial itself will be half the time of jury selection.
That's interesting. You've been down this road before, so we'll take your word for it. I also want to talk with you about the timeline moving forward. They were aiming for 2 weeks for the jury selection. Obviously, that's not going to happen. We're at 47. They want 64 before even getting to whittle things down to the 12 jurors for alternates. Your thoughts on when we will actually get to that point? We were saying maybe Tuesday, Wednesday. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm thinking Tuesday, Wednesday. I think we're going to get through today with jury selection. I think everybody's going to kind of, if it were me, here's what I would think would happen, is that we're going to get through today. We're going to whittle away at some more jurors. And then what's going to happen at the end of today is everybody's going to kind of like go, let's regroup, let's think, let's evaluate, and let's think about it over the weekend and come back. And if anybody has any additional objections, what we call back strikes is, I didn't strike somebody. Mm-hmm. We put somebody on the 42 list or 47 or 64 list or whatever the number may be. And then we all go home at night and look at it over the weekend, and with your private investigators do all their social media research and investigation. And then we come back on Monday and go, oh, number 18, we have a problem. Number 36, we have a problem. And all of a sudden we start having conversation. So the other people that were not chosen into this small number, they're not going home. They're not going to be released from their subpoenas or their summonses. They're going to be on standby no matter what, because just because the judge says on Friday afternoon that we've got a panel does not mean we have a panel. So I would suspect Monday is going to be a regroup session.
Wow.
And probably Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday will actually be the opening statements.
Yeah, we're going to wrap this at 8:30, but before we do, I do want to go back a little bit, because if folks are just now joining us, you said something very interesting. As a trial attorney who's been down this road several times before, going into this, you would have done what? That case would not have been tried where it is for a reason. Tell us about that.
Absolutely should not be there. It's what we call a change of venue, and it absolutely should have been a change of venue. I personally would have had every news article, every news clip. I would have had everything filed into a motion that would probably be that thick, probably be 100. I've done it where I've had it almost 100 pages of showing all of the news articles, all of the, and then you go into the First Coast News where people, or what other, if there are other news stations, and you see what all the people post and all their opinions, and you track that, and you go with that, and then you put it all together and show the court that there's no way in the world we're going to get a fair trial here. And when you're in such a small community, the change of venue should have happened, even if they only moved it to Savannah. I mean, even if they just moved, I would have asked for Atlanta to move it because it's such a larger community, and there are more people that are going in and out of Atlanta. So I absolutely would have filed a motion for a change of venue and attached every news article that I could have possibly put out there. So a change of venue should have been granted, but judges don't like to do it because it's too expensive.
Right. And at this point, the odds of that happening in this case?
Not happening unless there's a mistrial. Okay, and just to briefly explain a mistrial, because there's 12 jurors and 4 alternates. And if they all make the 12 or one of this, whatever happens, it's going to be a verdict. But if one person does not agree to the verdict, whether it's guilty or not guilty, it's going to be a hung jury. And then they're going to start all over again. And at that point, I would 100% believe that it would be moved at that point if it was actually a hung jury.
Hoping that will not happen, though, at this point, right?
For the families, for
This
everybody.
is a lot for those families, both sides.
For the entire community,
Yes.
And as I mentioned earlier, the law enforcement officers that are involved in this. I mean, people don't think about those, the first responders, those kind of folks. So, yeah, I think everybody hopes this is going to end, whichever way it ends, with justice for either side.
Yeah. Attorney Richard Kurtz, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Folks, you are watching First Coast News' online coverage of the trial of the murder trial of 3 men charged with killing Ahmaud Arbery. We're going to let you go right into court at this point. It's set to start at 8:30 as jury selection continues on this day 9, week 2 of this trial. Thank you again.